Okay, this week we are going to be talking again to somebody who we did early in the podcast series. His name's Andrew Benson. He's a coworker of mine at Cycling 74, but he is really becoming quite well known as a visualist, visual artist, and graphic artist. He does a wide range of work, from some bizarro, unicorny stuff to live video production, to glurpy GIFs. I mean, every time I see his work, first of all, it's cool because it's identifiable. Secondly, it's cool because I'm like, hey, I know that dude. It's pretty neat. So with that, I'm going to say hi again to Andrew Benson. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Good. How's it going, Darwin?
It's going great. Thanks a lot for coming back for a repeat visit. Since we got your background the first time around, this time we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the practicalities of being a professional artist, and particularly a visual artist. And so I hope you're willing to go for a little ride with me on this.
Sure.
So first of all, why don't we start off by talking about some recent work that you've done? What are some more notable things that you've done recently?
Well, there's a couple things. The biggest thing I did was I had this kind of big, like, corporate event job as sort of like the giant pre-Super Bowl parties and stuff like that. And so that involved, there was like a DJ show, and there was this like specially made venue in San Francisco out in the dog patch. They had completely converted like this old shipyard building into a music venue. And so I was responsible for doing some audio responsive visuals for a special kind of VIP event that was happening there as part of those celebrations. And that was a really cool job because I was working through an agency, and so it's sort of rare that I get to really collaborate with a whole group of people and work with a creative director and other artists and animators and stuff like that. And so the really great part of that job was sort of the interplay between sort of taking the stills and motion tests and animations that the creative director and the art directors were coming up with and converting that into something that could happen in real time. And so like the process there was really kind of cool because like they would send me like a Cinema 4D file, and I would sort of like dig in there and be like, okay, well that's a cloner, and that's like a modifier on that cloner, and so I can take that and do this equation and take it into Max MSP and like jitter and do like sort of replicate those expressions and the way that things are moving around and stuff like that. It's a really fun process, and it came off really well. So
sure. Did you limit yourself to working with Max, or did you use other tools also?
I'm trying to think. I think like once I heard the specs on the job and the timeline and what they wanted to do and the way that they wanted to work on it, Max was sort of the obvious choice because for one thing, I wasn't working with another developer that had some pre-existing tool that they were trying to push,
Right,
So
sure.
it was like, so I had completely free reign to kind of choose how I wanted to work, and kind of knowing what they wanted to do and how they wanted the audio to be really, like, they really wanted to create a connection between the audio and the graphics. And for me, like, I mean, for one thing, Max is just sort of like part of my brain at this point.
Sure.
And so I know that I can execute something really quickly in Max. If nobody else is depending on like sort of being able to like write C++ code alongside me or something, then Max is the obvious choice there.
Sure, that makes sense. Now, my one question I would have is, well, I've got a lot of questions just about this kind of gig because it's something I've never done. I've never done the large corporate gig thing. First of all, what is like the scale that we're talking about? So you had a screen. How big was the screen?
It's about the size of my living room wall is like one of the screens.
Okay.
And like, so there was like a lower kind of big LED wall. And then above, like sort of behind the DJ booth, there was a projection as well.
Oh, I see.
So it was actually, it was sort of two screens, and there was a top screen and a bottom screen.
Right.
And as people walked in the door of this venue space, it's sort of like it was like a lounge kind of environment. And so as they walk in through the door, they see like they're faced to the LED screen. And
I see.
it's not like a giant. It wasn't like the room that I was in was sort of the VIP lounge, so it wasn't like
Oh, okay, I
giant.
get
It
it.
wasn't like there was like a whole giant multi-level music venue like
Right.
next door to that. But
Uh,
the space that I was in was a little bit more intimate and
oh,
had
so
a
you were in the liquefied shrimp room.
yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Yeah, there was some good appetizers.
I'll bet. That's hilarious. So I'm curious then, first of all, why would someone hire you for a gig like that? And secondly, what do you do to make it so that you're clearly not doing sort of the regurgitated DJ, VJ kind of a thing? You know, I assume that you get the job because you're not going to be standard issue, right?
Yeah, I think that in this case, I was the only person in their professional network that could pull the job
Pull
off.
off real time stuff. Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
and yeah, in the way that they wanted to do it.
Got it.
I talked to them about it, and they were really happy with the fact that I was coming from a visual background, but was sort of competent about programming and stuff like that. And that I feel like that made a lot of the communication like I mean to me like I think if I could highlight anything from like what made that job work was like having really good back and forth communication with the creative team is like them being able to share what they want and what they're interested in, and then me being able to say, oh, I get what you're saying there, and then take it and run with it, and then also sending them ongoing updates to the software itself so that they could see it as well.
So, what kind of different stuff did you get from them? I mean, so you talked already about getting a Cinema 4D scene, which has a lot of its own peculiar internal methods for doing things.
Mhm.
And you have to be knowledgeable about that in order to talk sensibly to them. What other technologies or systems were they using that you had to kind of understand?
Well, some of it was, I mean, luckily this is like a production agency that is, I mean, they do work with Unity and they do, so they were pretty good about like sort of being able to translate whatever they were working on into stuff that I could use.
Okay.
But some of it was just Photoshop compositions that one of the creative directors made to kind of give to the client. And so, in agency work, there's this whole back and forth process where you have the creative directors who are putting together like these kind of mood boards, and as it gets further along they become more and more narrow, and there's like these are still frames that we've shown the client has approved them,
Okay.
and so we have to stay kind of close to this look,
Right.
and so that was kind of the overall guiding force,
Sure.
were these kind of style frames. And then I was getting motion samples. So a lot of the work was just going on inside of After Effects. They were making little kind of graphic animations. So
Got
the
it.
the project overall had kind of three different looks to it. One of which was very sort of 3D cinema 4D, lots of like replicated mesh shapes and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And then the other two sort of main looks were very sort of flat 2D vector graphics, kind of like, little balls jumping around
Got
and
it. Right.
swirly things and stuff like that.
Sure. Very interesting. How did you get working with them? Because I know you do other work and you have some sort of like agency that you work with on that. Are they like connected in some way or two completely different practices?
So in this particular case, I was contacted by a former student of mine,
Oh,
actually.
okay. Oh, interesting.
um, yeah, it was. I had actually forgotten that he had ever taken my class. I knew he was at SFAI when I was teaching,
Okay.
and I was like, Did you really? Were you one of my students?" And he was like, he was there when I was like teaching my first year,
Oh, okay.
doing the interactive media classes, and
Right.
so over the years, he's sort of gotten really good at being a programmer. Like he's a really smart programmer, and so he's been able to kind of get in these positions. His name's Ian Bartholomew, and he's now, I think he's back at Huge, which is kind of one of those really big ad production agencies. They do a
Okay.
lot of tech work.
Right.
But so he brought me on to the project because they were kind of thinking about different concepts. And he was like, this is like, I know the guy, we can do this.
Sure, sure. Now, this all took place in San Francisco, right?
Yeah, the actual event happened in San
Right.
Francisco. All the prep work was done in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I was going to say, since the last time we talked, you made a pretty big life move, which was moving from San Francisco to LA. Why did you make the move?
Well, there was a lot of reasons. I think the most sort of present reason in our minds was that we lived in a junior one-bedroom apartment, and first we were doing that with one kid, and then my second daughter was born,
Ouch.
and
Yeah. Okay.
and I mean, we were already, when we moved into that apartment, we were like, we're gonna have to scale up at some point.
Right, right.
And that was sort of 5 years ago that we had moved in there. And our older daughter just kept getting bigger. And
They do that, right?
then the younger daughter came along. And then so like the idea of everyone living in the same bedroom was just
Yeah.
like becoming like more and more ridiculous as time went
Right.
by. And shortly after we had moved into that apartment was when sort of rent prices in San Francisco started kind of just tripling and quadrupling and all
Right.
that. So it was like we were kind of stuck in a situation that we couldn't we couldn't scale up, but we could
Right.
afford to keep doing the same thing if we were able to.
Right.
So there was that, like sort of not having a place in San Francisco to go other than where we were living. But then also, I had reached a point where, I mean, I was living in San Francisco in Bernal Heights, which is New York Times did some piece about it being like the hottest real estate market in America. Sort of like within the time that I was living there, it had become sort of a massive explosion. So, but I had reached this point where everyone I talked to pretty much every day had like some sad story to tell about what's happening in San Francisco. And it was like this real feeling in the art community there of like everything is falling apart.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that from so many people.
Like we're losing, like, who did we lose this week? Who got evicted? What art space has to shut down? And there's a few organizations that are there and they're really fighting the good fight. And I mean, like Southern Exposure is still in the mission, and there's some really great stuff still happening. And I keep hearing, there's this whole kind of Minnesota Street project that just went up. So I mean, there's people there who are really kind of fighting the good fight. But I also realized that I'm not capable of fighting that fight on the level
Right.
that, like, that sort of like the longer I stayed there, the more responsible I started feeling for the city and how things were going. And I just kind of reached a point where it was like I have my family, I have the art I'm trying to make, I have everything else, and ultimately I just had to cut and run to a certain extent.
Yeah. Yep,
But
I hear you.
also, I mean, the other side of that is LA is a great place. Like it's really easy to kind of get caught up in this victim narrative of like sort of like I'm this exile from San Francisco.
Yeah.
I've been ejected from my
Right.
home, and
Right.
but ultimately like we really like we had wanted to move to LA for a good like 5 or 6 years before we actually made the jump.
Oh, okay.
It was sort of a matter of time, both between my wife's professional ambitions and my own. Just like LA was really way better of a place for that.
Better fit. I'm contemplating a move shortly. I'm going to be moving from the Boulder, Denver area. I'm going to be moving to near Minneapolis. Obviously, kind of different levels of city there, but still similar in concept, which is I've built sort of an art community here. And now I'm going to sort of like skip out of town and go to a new one.
Mm.
And you've just done that. And so now I need some advice from you. How do you make that kind of transition? How much do you stay connected to the old group? How do you develop a new group? And what are some of the tricks to making a transition like that?
It is. It's really hard to make the transition. I mean, even San Francisco to LA. I mean, they're very close, and there's a lot of interchange between San Francisco and Los Angeles, like, sort of artistically and socially. But I would say like the thing that really hurt probably the most of switching cities is this feeling of like going from, like, I had lived in San Francisco for 12 years. I went to school there. I was teaching there for 6 years, and sort of maintaining this very like kind of like sort of low profile life, but doing like sort of doing the best I could with that within that system. You build up this kind of great network of friends and people that you bump into all the time, and it's like all that little stuff, like, oh, I need to do this thing, I know who to call
Right.
to make that happen, and so making the transition from having this kind of like really deep local network to going somewhere where it's like, yeah, I know some people in LA, and I every day I feel a little bit more settled socially here, but there was definitely some adjustment period to sort of going from like the elder statesman of the art scene in San Francisco to being like sort of the new guy in town in LA.
Right. So like one of the things that I'm really scared about is that here around Denver, I've gotten the opportunity, and recently especially, you've gotten more opportunities to do things like, work with the Denver Art Museum, which is a Class A art museum, working with them on installations and projects and design and stuff like that. It's really fantastic. And it's really hard to imagine walking away from the interesting opportunities that holds. I mean, there's
Hmm.
just literally just changing venues
Hmm.
means that there's going to be a lot of lost opportunity, or at least it seems like it. Do you try to keep up with anything back in San Francisco? Do you try to maintain any gigs there, or did you have to just walk away?
I mean, I try to keep up socially, but it's hard. I mean, the way I would sort of compare it is like if when you work at like a coffee shop or something, and you like have your work buddies,
Right.
and then you like go and you quit that job and you move to another coffee shop, and all of a sudden, like, your those old work buddies, like, you don't really call them anymore.
Right. Right.
And I feel really bad about it, of course, but I don't do as good of a job of keeping up with like sort of current events in San Francisco as I probably could. But
Right.
I've been going up there a couple times a year because we have some good friends, and I have an 8-year-old daughter who has like best friends back in the Bay Area
Still.
that we have to
Right.
meet up with and hang out with, and we're of course good friends with their parents too. So
Right. Right.
it's, I guess, the weird thing about it is that I feel like I'm keeping up a lot with people in San Francisco, but it's not really like art. The like my art friends, I've been less good at keeping up with.
So mostly your parenting friends that
Yeah,
stay
yeah.
engaged with. Interesting.
It's weird when you start realizing what your priorities are
Yeah.
like that.
Right. So when you move into town, what is the process you go through to basically say, "Here I am," or whatever?
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
or
I
do you
think
depend on sort of like the virtual world to open doors?
I think it's a little of both. I think I have a few friends here that I knew already, both sort of online and in person. Like I lived in LA when I was 18 years old and spent a couple years here before moving up north. So I have like a sort of like a little bit of like a family and social network here from that, but also my friend Johnny Woods lives in my neighborhood. And so he and I were, sort of hanging out right off the bat. And there's these events that happen almost monthly called Ghosting in LA, which is like this really great, like, sort of experimental animation screening slash party that happens in downtown LA. It's a pretty interesting scene. Like, it's almost like going to like a punk rock like house show,
Uh-huh.
but with like an animation screening attached to it.
Wow. That's
Uh,
cool.
and I knew about that because they had shown my work a few years ago.
Right.
I know some people who were involved in organizing it, but that turned into like a really nice kind of like social thing that I could go out to. And I think just like forcing myself to get out of the house a little bit has been the biggest thing, because otherwise, like, I don't know how else to make friends.
Yeah, I hear you. In a way, one of the things that's kind of interesting to me about sort of like the virtualization of life is that one of the most active areas of virtualization that I'm involved in now is like meetups where I find ways to get out of the house and meet humans again, right? It's hilarious that that's one of the big interactions, far more than Twitter or Facebook at this point. I'm a meetup guy.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, I generally hope that the future of technology is not staring at it.
Right, right. I hear you. The chip implanted in your head, and then you can just
Right.
lay in a vat of something. Right?
God, I hope not.
I hope not too. One of the things that you mentioned that I caught wind of recently is that you had done something for Adult Swim. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was I did a short animation for the Off the Air program, which is directed by Dave Hughes at Adult Swim, and I think it airs at like 2 or 3 in the morning on Adult Swim. And it's a really, if you haven't watched that show at all, like it's like it was kind of mind blowing when I discovered it because
Uh huh.
it's a half hour of good music and crazy videos, and he manages to dig up some of my favorite video artists and animators to contribute work to that show. So I was really happy to be invited to be part of their. They were kind of doing a New Year's edition. Dave approached me and was like, "Hey, do you have anything you're working on?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have this idea kicking around in my head. It's this very narrative, like sci-fi, like sort of near future sci-fi character thing." And like at that point, it was like, I had like some character models put together and a couple of kind of style frames. And I sent that to him, and he was like, "Well, the only catch, like he's like, I love this, but the only catch is you only have a week to work on it." And like, we like negotiated over like, how much I would charge them for that and, all that kind of stuff. And like, I was like, okay, well, like that particular week I had like a minor surgery, and so I like sort of had to be off my feet anyway.
Uh huh.
So I was like, okay, let's do this.
Oh my God.
So it was like a minute and a half of animation, and I don't know if I would take on like that kind of a thing on that short of a deadline again, but
Right.
it was definitely one of those ones where like I was kind of like running across the finish line and like like super excited that I was able to pull it together in time. But I really like how it turned out, and the whole episode was really pretty cool.
That's fantastic. That sounds fun. Um, Now the other thing that I heard about you recently, or I saw recently, because they're in my radar anyway, is that you have been invited to the upcoming Moog Fest.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that. I've never been to a Moog Fest before, and it
Well, and
looks.
it's funny because I think of it as like related to Moog synths and stuff, but really they've developed that into like this combination of a performance festival and multimedia arts festival. It's a lot broader than just like, hey, let's tip a beer to Bob Moog.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually just looking at their schedule today, and just I was feeling a little overwhelmed, because like the lineup is just insane. But it's also it's like it's not just that they get really great artists to come and perform. They also have this whole kind of conference sort of thing going on where they have like workshops and master classes and artist talks and all sorts of things. So I'm going to be doing two things at MoogFest. I'm going to be doing live visuals for two of like they're doing these durational performances. So I'm going to be working with Greg Fox on his, and there's also a durational performance by EMA and Jana Hunter, and I'm going to be splitting that with the other person one of the other people I'm traveling with, which is Ria McNamara.
Can you
And
explain what a durational performance is?
I think I can. The way I understand it is they're sort of multi-hour musical performances. So high probability that it's going to be a total noodle fest,
Right, right.
which I'm kind of into. Like I'm really
Can be fun.
um, like my only knowledge of Greg Fox's music is like him doing these sort of amazing drum solos.
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, he's like a very super talented drummer. So I'm sort of waiting to see what he pulls out and like am I going to be doing visuals for like a 4 hour drum solo? Like that sounds amazing. So so I'm super excited about that. We'll see. Suzanne Ciani's doing one as well that my friend JJ is doing visuals for, and that's going to be really amazing because she's sort of this hero of like modular synthesis,
Yes,
and
she's a hero of mine, believe me.
yeah, and my friend JJ Stratford is she's a really amazing analog video artist. So she uses like the LZX modules, and I think she has a Fairlight video
Oh my
processor,
goodness.
and she just like she's just a really cool person too, and like she really like I don't know I feel like she kind of gets into character too when she performs, which is so impressive to me. Um, but yeah, and so we're going there together as under the banner of the Undervolt and Company video label,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
and we're like so. Moogfest made a deal with them that we would provide the all the live visuals for the durational performances at Moogfest, and then both JJ and I and her collaborator Steffi Duckula are going to be, I hope I pronounced her name right, um, are going to be doing workshops as well. So I'm doing one, I believe it's called like software as part of the creative process.
Okay.
And JJ is going to be doing a workshop about analog video synthesis with
Interesting.
Steffi.
So this is, you say this is part of the Undervolt video label. I've never really personally experienced the video label before. Can you explain a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple kind of examples of this throughout history, but they're really kind of taking the sort of record label metaphor and applying it to experimental video and animation. And the idea, I think it was originally Yoshi Sodioka, Johnny Woods, and I think Nicholas O'Brien was also one of the founding members of Undervolt and Company. And their original idea was to sell artist-made videos as albums. So
Okay.
so they approached a number of different artists to make these sort of video albums. My favorite of which is probably Jacob Chiocci's. It might be I'm not sure if it's actually under Extreme Animals or under Jacob's name himself. And then Sabrina Rate has a really great one. Brenna Murphy also has a really good one. And then recently they've started doing what they're calling singles, and these are just sort of like a single video without the whole kind of like album thing. And I did one of those. I did like an animation video for that.
All right. So where do I go to? I mean, and is this something that's sold, or is it just like a packaging concept, or is it a marketing mechanism for something else? What is the you know you
It's
know what I
all
mean?
of the above. So their original notion was that they were, they're selling these things. So it was like, sort of an experiment in can we sell art videos like they are MP3 downloads,
Right. Right.
And I think they also made them available as DVDs as well, at least for the first several of them.
Hmm.
So there is some kind of like merchandise aspect to it. But then what Johnny was telling me recently, one of the sort of side effects of having this roster of artists associated with you is that there are institutions all over the world that like need to fill programming.
Right.
Uh, and like maybe they don't have a curator on staff who knows a whole lot about what's happening in experimental video,
Right.
and so they get calls from all over the place just saying like, "Hey, can you guys put together like an hour-long screening for us?"
Right. Right.
So all of a sudden being associated with this crew of people is like, it's sort of like a just add water curatorial thing, it's and like, they'll send out this really great screening of some of my favorite artists,
Right.
all one set,
So, first of all, in the show notes, I'll make sure I point people again to the location of your work. But why don't we just say it here? Because, quite frankly, a lot of consolidators get their hands on my podcast, and some of those people never get a chance to look at my website. So, where do we go to look at your work, first of all?
Probably the best place to start would be my website, which is pixlpa.com. And then beyond that, probably like there's my Vimeo account as well, under the same name. Um, and those are probably like the best starting places. I feel like I as widely ranging as I mean as wide ranging as my work is, I also just sort of throw it out there all over the place. So
You do, because actually I interact a lot with it based on things that you post on. I think mostly on Twitter is where I see sort of you're like, oh, here's something I just squirted out. It's kind of a cool way to keep track of you, because I kind of feel like I'm like standing outside your studio and all of a sudden a piece of paper comes flying out the window or something, right?
that's good. I mean, I feel like, that's really the brand I'm trying to create on Twitter, as the like like studio visit
Right.
experience, No, but I tend to kind of use Twitter as sort of like a little bit of like a testing ground for weird ideas that I'm having, and in the moment kind of work in progress kind of stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, I do post a lot of that sort of stuff on there, mostly as like kind of animated GIFs.
Right. And then who are you? You've mentioned a couple of times like some of your favorite animators and stuff. Do me a favor and drop some names for people. So, an awful lot of the people I interview and a lot of the people that listen are really focused on the music side of art and music. But a lot of them, when I talk to them, they're like, I'm curious, I want to know more. Who do I start looking at? Who do I get into? So why don't you drop some names and give people a chance to do a little web surfing?
Sure. I mean, I want to give sort of a caveat at the beginning of like these things are always a minefield, because
Right.
you're not going to mention like your best friend
Oh
on
yeah. You're
accident,
good. You're oh,
and
believe me, the whole point of this question is to get you in trouble.
yeah. So like, if I, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings here. But I think sort of like people who've done recent things that have caught my eye. I think like sort of want to focus on that is my friend JJ Stratford that I mentioned earlier. I think she often goes by Jennifer Juniper Stratford online. The There's Brennan Murphy and Birch Cooper, who often perform together as Masher or MSHR, do really great work together and separately as well. Ian Chang is a New York based artist that I really like. I feel like he and I are always kind of on a parallel trajectory, even though our work is extremely different from one another. He just did this iPhone app, which is like a meditation game where you are trying to control a corgi. It's called Bad Corky. Um, it's actually kind of amazing, and I'm like, it's like one of my favorite things right now. Uh,
Sounds awesome.
um, Besides that, Johnny Woods, good friend of mine, does some really amazing animations. And Susie Poling is an artist here in LA who was also once from the Bay Area as well. Does some really fantastic work, both as a performer and as a kind of installation and video artist. Trying to think, like, I'm sure I'm forgetting a million great people, but I think I'll leave it with that list for now.
Sure, that's pretty tasty list.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, I want to thank you again for spending time. It's fantastic to get caught up. It was great to kind of hear your perspectives on my scary upcoming move and the fact that you have absolutely no real advice for me.
Oh, it'll be great. It'll be fine.
I'll make it right.
It's always, I think each of those kinds of things is an opportunity for growing in a way
Right.
you didn't expect. So it'll be good. Uh,
Sure. And But also just thanks for talking about the process of being a professional. I think that's an area that, people are just scared to talk about it. They feel uncomfortable because it either seems like you're sort of like sullying the art, right?
Yeah.
Or conversely, like you're either bragging or admitting defeat, right? And so I think you walked a really nice line of just sort of like saying, here's what it kind of looks like, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I am hesitant to say that anybody else's experience is going to look like anything like mine, but
Right.
I think everybody's just trying to figure it out as they go, and I'm
I
definitely
agree.
one of those people.
Well, fantastic. Thanks a lot for sharing what you have learned. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, man. Catch you soon.
All right, talk to you later, Darwin.
Bye. Well, I think we all got some advice that we can heed in that chat. That was really interesting. And if you haven't checked out Andrew's work, you really need to. It's some amazing stuff. Well, I'm sitting here in the mountains of Colorado, right in the middle of snowpocalypse or dumpzilla or whatever they want. We've got about, let's say, 3.5 to 4 feet of snow in the last day and a half. So I ain't going anywhere. But you get to, so maybe go out and have a coffee for me, or a nice Sunday brunch, or if you're listening to this in a weekday, make sure that you swing by your favorite coffee shop and have one for me. I hope that you enjoy the podcast, and I hope that I'll get a chance to talk to you again next week. Thanks a lot.